Hello and welcome back. Uh, in part one of chapter 12, we paused at a moment of complete accountability, a declaration of um, responsibility without dilution. Um, I and I alone. It was one of those moments which makes you realize how revered to accountability the samurai were and possibly still are. That line carries weight beyond the historical context and it reflects a mindset in which honor was inseparable from personal ownership. So there was no separation between action and identity. What one did, one became responsible for entirely. So today we continue reading, not to dwell on ritual, but to understand the character system that produced such resolve. Um, Before we go any further, if these readings and reflections are adding value to your life in any way, if they're helping you think deeper, grow stronger, and live with more purpose, then I'd really appreciate your support. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what is coming next. This channel is about growth, it's about responsibility, it's about becoming better day by day together. Your support helps this community grow, and I'm grateful for every single one of you. Now, let's continue with chapter 12, part 2. Before I go into my reading, I'll just have a quick drink. Let me know, please, in the comment section if my sound is coming through, okay? And how do you like the green? I think the green looks pretty awesome. Um, so here we go. Bowing once more, the speaker allowed his upper garments to slip down to his girdle and remained naked to the waist. Carefully, according to custom, he tucked his sleeves under his knees to prevent himself from falling backward, for the noble Japanese gentleman should die falling back forwards. Deliberately, with a steady hand, he took the dirk that lay before him. He looked at it with wistful. He looked at it wistfully, almost affectionately. For a moment he seemed to collect his thoughts for the last time, and then, stabbing himself deeply below the waist in the left hand side, he drew the dirk slowly across to his right side, and turning it in the wound, gave a slight cut upwards. During this sickeningly painful operation, he never moved a muscle of his face. When he drew out the dirk, he leaned forward and stretched out his neck. An expression of pain for the first time crossed his face. Still crouching by his side, had been keenly watching his every movement, sprang to his feet, poised his sword for a second in the air. There was a flash, a heavy, ugly thud, a crashing fall. With one blow, the head had been severed from the body. A dead silence followed, broken only by the hideous noise of the blood throbbing out of the in head before us, which but a moment before had been a brave and chivalrous man. It was horrible. The Kaishaku made a low bow, wiped his sword with a piece of paper which he had ready for the purpose, and retired from the raised floor, and the stained dirk was solemnly borne away, a bloody proof of the execution. The two representatives of the Mikado then left their places, and crossing over to where the foreign witnesses sat, called to us to witness that the sentence of death upon Taki Zenzaburo had been faithfully carried out. The ceremony being at an end, we left the temple. I might multiply any number of descriptions of seppuku from literature or from the relation of eyewitnesses, but one more instance will suffice. Two brothers, Sakon and Naiki, respectively, 24 and 27 years of age, made an effort to kill Ieyasu in order to avenge their father's wrongs. But before they could enter the camp, they were made prisoners. The old general admired the pluck of the youths who dared an attempt on his life, and ordered that they should be allowed to die an honorable death. Their little brother Hachimaro, a mere infant of 8 summers, was condemned to a similar fate, as the sentence was pronounced on all the male members of the family, and the three were taken to a monastery where it was to be executed. A physician who was present on the occasion has left us a diary from which the following scene is translated. When they were all seated in a row for final dispatch, Seikon turned to the youngest and said, "Go thou first, for I wish to be sure thou thou doest it aright." Upon the little one's replying that, as he had never seen seppuku performed, he would like to see his brothers do it, and then he could follow them, the older brother smiled between their tears. "Well said, little fellow. So canst thou well boast of being our father's child." When they had placed him between them, Sekon thrust the dagger into the left side of his own abdomen, and asked, "Look, brother, dost understand now? Only don't push the dagger too far, lest thou fall back. Lean forward rather, and keep thy knees well composed." Naiki did likewise, and said to the boy, "Keep thy eyes open, or else thou mayst look like a dying woman. If thy dagger feels anything within and thy strength fails, take courage and double thy effort to cut across." The child looked from one to the other, and when both had expired, he calmly half denuded himself and followed the examples set him on either hand. The glorification of seppuku offered, naturally enough, no small temptation to its unwarranted committal. For causes entirely incompatible with reason, or for reasons entirely undeserving of death, hot-headed youths rushed into it as insects fly into fire. Mixed and dubious motives drove more samurai to this deed than nuns into convent gates. Life was cheap, cheap as reckoned by the popular standard of honor. The saddest feature was that honor which was always in the agio, so to speak, was not always solid gold, but alloyed with baser metals. No one circle in the inferno will boast of greater density of Japanese population than the seventh, to which Dante consigns all victims of self destruction. And yet, for a true samurai to hasten death or to court it was alike cowardice. A typical fighter, when he lost battle after battle and was pursued from plain to hill and from bush to cavern, found himself hungry and alone in the dark hollow of a tree, his sword blunt with use, his bow broken and arrows exhausted. Did not the noblest of the Romans fall upon his own sword in Philippi under the circumstances? Deemed it cowardly to die, but with a fortitude approaching a Christian martyr's, cheered himself as an impromptu verse. Come, evermore come, ye dread sorrows and pains, and heap on my burdened back, that I not one test my lack of what strength in me remains. This then was the Bushido teaching. Bear and face all calamities and adversities with patience and a pure conscience, for as Mencius taught, when heaven is about to confer a great office on anyone, it first exercises his mind with suffering and his sinews and bones with toil. It exposes his body to hunger and subjects him to extreme poverty, and it confounds his undertakings. In all these ways, it stimulates his mind, hardens his nature, and supplies his incompetencies. True honor lies in fulfilling heaven's decree, and no death incurred in so doing is ignominious, whereas death to avoid what heaven has in store is cowardly indeed. In that quaint book of Sir Thomas Browne's Religio Medici, there is an exact English equivalent for what is repeatedly taught in our precepts. Let me quote it. It is a brave act of valor to contemn death, but where life is more terrible than death, it is then the truest valor to dare to live. A renowned priest of the 7th century satirically observed. Talk as he may, a samurai who never has died is apt in decisive moments to flee or hide. Again, him who once has died in the bottom of his breast, no spears of Sanada nor all the arrows of Tametomo can pierce. How near we come to the portals of the temple whose builder taught, he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. These are but a few of the numerous examples which tend to confirm the moral identity of the human species, notwithstanding an attempt so assiduously made to render the distinction between Christian and pagan as great as possible. We have thus seen that the Bushido institution of suicide was never so irrational nor barbarous as its abuse strikes us at first sight. We will now see whether it is sister institution of redress, or call it revenge, if you will, has its mitigating features. I hope I can dispose of this question in a few words, since a similar institution, or call it custom, if that suits you better, has sometime prevailed among all peoples and has not yet become entirely obsolete, as attested by the continuance of dueling and lynching. Why has not an American captain recently challenged Esther Hazy that the wrongs of Dreyfus be avenged? Among a savage tribe which has no marriage, adultery is not a sin, and only the jealousy of a lover protects a woman from abuse. So, in a time which has no criminal court, murder is not a crime, and only the vigilant vengeance of the victim's people preserves social order. What is the most beautiful thing on earth? Said Osiris to Horus. The reply was, to avenge a parent's wrongs, to which a Japanese would have added, and a master's. In revenge, there is something which satisfies one's sense of justice. The avenger reasons, my good father did not deserve death. He who killed him did great evil. My father, if he were alive, would not tolerate a deed like this. Heaven itself hates wrongdoing. It is the will of my father, it is the will of heaven, that the evildoer cease from his work. He must perish by my hand, because he shed my father's blood. I, who am his flesh and blood, must shed the murderer's. The same heaven shall not shelter him and me. The ratiocination is simple and childish, though we know Hamlet did not reason much more deeply. Nevertheless, it shows an innate sense of exact balance and equal justice, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Our sense of revenge is as exact as our mathematical faculty, and until both terms of the equation are satisfied, we cannot get over the sense of something left undone. In Judaism, which believed in a jealous God, or in Greek mythology, which provided a nemesis, vengeance may be left to superhuman agencies. But common sense furnished Bushido with the institution of redress as a kind of ethical court of equity, where people could take cases not to be judged in accordance with ordinary law. The master of the 47 Ronins was condemned to death. He had no court of higher instance to appeal to. His faithful retainers addressed themselves to vengeance, and only Supreme Court existing, they in their turn were condemned by common law. But the popular instinct passed a different judgment, and hence their memory is still kept as green and fragrant as their graves in Sengakuji to this day. Though Lao Tse taught to recompense injury with kindness, the voice of Confucius was very much louder, which counseled that injury must be recompensed with justice, and yet revenge was justified only when it was undertaken in behalf of our superiors and benefactors. One's own wrongs, including injuries done to wife and children, were to be borne and forgiven. A samurai could therefore fully sympathize with Hannibal's oath to avenge his country's wrongs, but he scorns James Hamilton for wearing in his girdle a handful of earth from his wife's grave as an internal incentive to avenge her wrongs on the Regent Murray. Both of these institutions of suicide and redress lost their raison d'etre at the promulgation of the criminal code. No more do we hear of romantic adventures of a fair maiden as she tracks in disguise the murderer of her parent. No one no more can we witness tragedies of family vendetta enacted. The knight errantry of Miyamoto Musashi is now a tale of the past. The well ordered police spies out the criminal for the injured party, and the law meets out justice. The whole state and society will see that wrong is righted, the sense of justice satisfied. There is no need of katakuichi. If this had meant that hunger of the heart which feeds upon the hope of glutting that hunger with the lifeblood of the victim, as a New England divine has described it, a few paragraphs in the criminal code would not so entirely have made an end of it. As to seppuku, though it too has no existence de jure, we will hear of it from time to time, and shall continue to hear, I am afraid, as long as the past is remembered. Mainly painless and time saving methods of self immolation will come in vogue, as its votaries are increasing with fearful rapidity throughout the world. But Professor Morselli will have to concede to seppuku an aristocratic position among them. He maintains that when suicide is accomplished by very painful means or at the cost of prolonged agony, and 99 cases out of 100, it may be assigned as an act of a mind disordered by fanaticism, by madness, or by morbid excitement. But a normal seppuku does not savor of fanaticism or madness or excitement. At most sang Freud, being necessary to its successful accomplishment. Of the two kinds into which Dr. Strahan divides suicide, the rational or QRC and the irrational or true seppuku, is the best example of the former type. From these bloody institutions, as well as from the general tenor of Bushido, it is easy to infer that the sword played an important part in social discipline and life. The saying passed as an axiom which called the sword the soul of the samurai and made it the emblem of power and prowess. So, after reflecting on the entirety of this chapter, what becomes clear is that honor in the Bushido framework was not performance, it was more internal alignment. A person's outer conduct mirrored their inner standard. And this is where the philosophy becomes profoundly relevant. Modern growth requires a similar alignment, not in extreme gestures, but in consistent integrity. So mental growth begins when we develop the courage to observe ourselves honestly. Awareness disrupts autopilot. Once conscious of our tendencies like avoidance, defensiveness, and distraction, we are presented with a choice, like to continue unconsciously or evolve deliberately. True development requires something to dissolve. Often it is ego. Sometimes it is pride. Frequently it is a comforting narrative that certain circumstances are primarily responsible for our outcomes. When we take ownership into condition, something powerful shifts internally. We move from reacting to shaping, from complaining to constructing, from feeling controlled by problems to understanding that challenges are opportunities of refinement. Success in its most stable form is not a dramatic thing. It emerges from consistency, from organizing time intentionally rather than surrendering it to urgency. When hours are structured around priorities instead of impulses, progress becomes measurable. Health improves when it is scheduled, learning expands when it is deliberate, and relationships they deepen when attention is undivided. Building wealth, whether it be financially, mentally, or relationally, it follows the same principle. Like financial stability grows from discipline and long term thinking. Mental resilience, it develops through reading, reflection, and measured response under pressure. Relational wealth accumulates through sincerity, reliability, and presence. So these are just some sort of ways in which the principles we've learned in these chapters, how they affect us in our growth. Like selflessness strengthens all those foundations when interactions are guided by contribution rather than ego. Trust compounds. So, listening attentively, honoring commitments, and serving without hidden agenda, they cultivate bonds that endure beyond convenience. Stability rises not from avoiding difficulty, but from responding to it constructively. Life will always present friction. Businesses will encounter setbacks. Plans will require adjustment. Yet, when responsibility is fully embraced, obstacles transform from threats into training. So, showing up consistently, especially when enthusiasm fluctuates and separates aspirations from achievement. Motivation may vary, commitment anchors progress. Over time, disciplined action produces confidence, and confidence generates calm. Happiness then becomes less dependent on circumstance and more rooted in coherence, the alignment between our values and our behavior. When words match our actions and intentions align with effort, peace becomes internal rather than conditional. The modern application of this chapter is not dramatic sacrifice, it is daily honor, it is integrity in private decisions, it is accountability when unseen, it is organizing life with intention rather than drifting through action. When we build this internal structure, awareness, responsibility, discipline, selflessness, we begin constructing a life marked by clarity, stability, and purpose. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson here. Freedom does not come from avoiding responsibility, it comes from mastering it. When we accept full ownership of our growth, our finances, our relationships, and our time, we move from dependency to agency. Problems no longer define us, they refine us. So, as we close chapter 12, consider this: what in your life requires clearer ownership? Where might growth begin if excuses ended? And what would shift if responsibility became non negotiable? The path to success, happiness, stability, and meaningful connection begins internally with the decision to align action with principle. So, thank you for continuing this journey with me. Your presence on here matters, and I appreciate the time you invest in these reflections. If this chapter resonated with you, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue exploring and applying these timeless philosophies together. And I look forward to seeing you on the next chapter. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Michael Reads. Until the next one, goodbye.